The house on Elmwood Avenue was a living, breathing thing. To the casual observer, it was just a two-story craftsman in a quiet, older neighborhood of Cleveland, its paint slightly faded, the wooden planks of the wraparound porch groaning softly under the weight of changing seasons. But to Mary Williams, it was a museum of her life. It was the house she and her late husband Thomas had fought tooth and nail to buy in 1982, back when real estate agents still tried to steer black couples away from this zip code. It was the house where the floorboards in the hallway still carried the faint, rhythmic indentations of her son Marcus bouncing a basketball, and where the doorframe in the kitchen bore the pencil marks charting her daughter Sarah's growth. Now, at 68 years old, Mary mostly shared the house with ghosts and silence. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and the air inside was thick with the scent of simmering collard greens and the faint metallic hum of the old refrigerator. Mary sat in her worn floral armchair by the window, rubbing her left knee. 35 years of working 12-hour shifts as an emergency room nurse had stripped the cartilage from her joints and left her with a heart condition that required a cocktail of expensive pills every morning. She wasn't destitute, but she was living the precarious, tightly budgeted reality of millions of retired Americans. Her pension and Social Security covered the property taxes, the utilities, and her groceries, but there was never much left over. The house was her only real asset, a fortress of equity built on decades of double shifts and deferred dreams. But lately, that fortress felt more like a waiting room. The realization hadn't come to Mary all at once. It wasn't a sudden explosion, but rather a slow, agonizing leak. A drip, drip, drip of disrespect and thinly veiled impatience from the two people she had brought into this world. Her mind drifted back to last Thanksgiving, a memory that still sat like a stone in her chest. She had spent 3 days preparing. She had baked Thomas's favorite sweet potato pies, brined the turkey, and polished the good silverware that only saw the light of day once a year. When Marcus arrived in his leased BMW, he spent the first 20 minutes pacing the living room, loudly complaining into his Bluetooth earpiece about his mid-level corporate subordinates. When Sarah finally showed up 2 hours late, she immediately began rearranging Mary's decorative pillows to create a better background for her Instagram photos, complaining about how dated the floral wallpaper looked. There was no warmth, no genuine inquiry about her health, other than Sarah's perfunctory, "You taking your pills, Mama?" Before pivoting to a 30-minute monologue about her disastrous dating life and the exorbitant cost of her personal trainer. But the true heartbreak had happened after dinner. Mary had gone into the kitchen to wrap up the leftover ham. The window above the sink was cracked open to let out the heat of the oven, and through the screen, she could hear the voices of her children. They were standing on the back patio, smoking Marcus's imported cigars, a habit Thomas would have never allowed on his property. "I'm just saying, it makes no financial sense," Marcus's voice had drifted in, crisp and authoritative. "She's one person rattling around in 4 bedrooms. The maintenance alone is eating into the property value. The gutters need replacing. The roof has maybe 5 years left. It's an inefficient allocation of assets." "Tell me about it," Sarah had chimed in, the clinking of her wine glass accompanying her sigh. "And with my rent going up again? It's ridiculous. If she just sold this place and downsized to a condo or went into one of those senior communities, she'd have liquid cash. And we'd have a little cushion. I can't keep living paycheck to paycheck, Marcus. I have Jamal to think about." Mary had frozen, the aluminum foil crinkling softly in her trembling hands. "She won't sell," Marcus had scoffed. "She's too emotionally attached. She thinks Dad's ghost is living in the floorboards. Honestly, Sarah, with her heart condition, we might just have to wait it out." The doctor said her last echocardiogram wasn't great. "We just need to make sure the property doesn't fall into disrepair before the estate passes to us." Wait it out. They were waiting for her to die. They weren't plotting her murder. They weren't monsters out of a true crime documentary. They were something much more common, and somehow much more painful. They were entitled. They viewed her continued survival as a mild financial inconvenience. They looked at the mother who had scrubbed bedpans and worked holidays to buy their braces and fund their college tuitions, and all they saw was a stubborn obstacle standing between them and their inheritance. Mary hadn't confronted them that night. She had simply wiped her tears, walked back into the dining room, and handed them their Tupperware containers of leftovers with a polite, hollow smile. But something inside her had irrevocably shifted. The unconditional, blinding love of a mother had been stripped away, replaced by a cold, devastating clarity. That clarity was still with her now, 6 months later, as the local evening news transitioned to the lottery drawing. Mary didn't play often, just 1 ticket a week, bought every Sunday after church at Mr. Patel's corner store. She always played the same sequence: Thomas's birth month, her birth date, the year they were married, Marcus's birthday, Sarah's birthday, and Jamal's age. It was a sentimental tax, a $2 donation to a fantasy she never actually expected to realize. On the television, the polished announcer smiled brightly. And tonight's historic Mega Millions jackpot, standing at an estimated $333 million, begins with the number G. 4, Mary whispered to herself, taking a sip of her lukewarm tea. 4, the announcer chimed. Mary blinked. She set her teacup down. Next up, we have 14. Mary reached into the pocket of her cardigan and pulled out the crumpled thermal receipt. The second number was 14. Moving on to 22. A strange prickling sensation began at the base of Mary's neck and radiated down her spine. The number on the ticket was 22. 82. Her breathing hitched. And for the final white ball, 28. Mary's vision blurred. The edges of the room seemed to darken, focusing entirely on the small piece of paper in her trembling hands. It matched. Every single number. And tonight's gold mega ball is 20. Jamal's age. The television continued to blare, the announcer excitedly explaining that there was only one winning ticket sold in the entire state of Ohio, but the sound faded into a dull, rushing roar in Mary's ears. $333 million. Even after the brutal federal and state taxes, it would be over $200 million in a lump sum. More wealth than the human brain could comfortably comprehend. It was private jet money. It was buy-an-island money. It was generational, empire-building wealth. Mary didn't scream. She didn't jump up and dance around the living room. Her heart, already fragile, fluttered dangerously like a trapped bird against her ribs. She placed her hand flat against her chest, closed her eyes, and took slow, measured breaths. When she finally opened her eyes, she looked across the room at the framed photograph of Thomas on the mantel. He was in his postal worker uniform, smiling that wide, gap-toothed smile that had made her fall in love with him in the summer of '74. "Well, old man," Mary whispered, her voice cracking in the silent room. "Looks like we finally caught a break." Her first instinct, the primal, ingrained reflex of a mother, was to pick up the phone. She wanted to call Marcus and tell him he never had to worry about corporate layoffs again. She wanted to call Sarah and tell her she could buy her own salon instead of renting a chair. She wanted to share the miracle. But as her hand hovered over the receiver of the landline, the memory of Thanksgiving night hit her like a physical blow. We might just have to wait it out. Her hand slowly pulled back. If she told them now, they would fall to their knees in gratitude. They would suddenly have all the time in the world for her. They would be at her house every day, bringing her groceries, driving her to appointments, drowning her in a suffocating manufactured affection fueled entirely by the $200 million sitting in her bank account. She would never, for the rest of her life, know if a hug was genuine or if it was just a down payment on a luxury car. "No," Mary said softly to the empty room, "not yet." Before she claimed the money, before she let this blinding light into her life, she needed to make sure her house was in order. The next morning, Mary dressed carefully in her Sunday best, a navy blue skirt suit and a string of modest pearls. She slipped the winning ticket into a Ziploc bag, placed it inside a small, fireproof lockbox, and took an Uber to downtown Cleveland. She didn't go to the lottery commission. Instead, she went to the gleaming glass and steel high-rise that housed the law firm of Henderson and Vance. Arthur Henderson had been Thomas's attorney for 30 years. He was a distinguished older black man with silver hair and a demeanor that inspired absolute trust. He had handled the closing on their house and drafted their simple, straightforward wills. Sitting in Arthur's mahogany-paneled office, Mary requested a complete audit of her legal and financial standing. "I'm thinking of making some changes, Arthur," Mary explained, keeping her posture perfect. "I want to make sure the deed to the house is clear, that the small mortgage we had left is fully documented. I just want everything neat before I transition." Arthur smiled warmly, adjusting his reading glasses as he pulled up her file on his computer monitor. "Always the meticulous one, Mary. Thomas used to say you kept the books tighter than Fort Knox. Let me just pull up the county records and the current banking queries." Arthur's voice trailed off. Mary watched as the warm smile slowly slipped from the lawyer's face. His brow furrowed, and he leaned closer to the screen, his eyes scanning the data rapidly. He clicked the mouse several times, his expression shifting from confusion to deep, profound concern. "Arthur?" Mary asked, a cold knot forming in her stomach. "Is something wrong?" Arthur took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. He looked at Mary with a mixture of pity and professional dread. "Mary, when were you planning on telling me about the HELOC?" Mary blinked. "The what?" "The home equity line of credit," Arthur said gently, turning the monitor slightly so she could see, even though she didn't understand the spreadsheets. "Against the house on Elmwood. It looks like it was opened 3 years ago. The limit was $150,000. The room seemed to tilt slightly. "Arthur, Thomas, and I paid off the 30-year fixed mortgage 10 years ago. I only have a tiny secondary loan for the roof repairs. I haven't taken out any credit lines." Arthur's face grew grim. He tapped the keyboard, pulling up a scanned PDF document. "Mary, the line is fully drawn. The balance is currently sitting at $148,000. And they've missed the last 2 payments. The bank is generating a pre-foreclosure warning." "Who missed the payments?" Mary demanded, her voice rising in panic. "Who took out the money?" Arthur printed the document and handed it across the desk. Mary's eyes scanned the page. It was a loan authorization form from a major national bank. At the bottom, authorizing the release of $150,000 of her home's equity, was a signature. Marcus Williams, signed in his capacity as power of attorney. The breath was knocked completely out of Mary's lungs. 3 years ago, she had suffered a transient ischemic attack, a mini-stroke. She had been in the hospital for 5 days, confused, frightened, and heavily medicated. Marcus had visited every day, bringing her favorite flowers, holding her hand. He had also brought a man in a suit, a notary. "It's just a precaution, Mama," Marcus had said, his voice soothing and loving as he placed the pen in her weak hand. "Just a limited power of attorney so I can pay your light bill and manage the hospital copays while you recover. You don't need to worry about anything. I've got you." He hadn't just paid the light bill. While she was lying in a hospital bed, relearning how to hold a spoon, her son, with the likely complicity of her daughter, had mortgaged her life's work. They had siphoned the blood out of the house Thomas built. Marcus, the regional director, the financial genius, had stolen $150,000 from his own mother, likely to cover his disastrous cryptocurrency gambles or to fund the lifestyle he paraded in front of his peers. And now they had stopped paying it back. The bank was coming for her home, and they hadn't said a word. "Mary?" Arthur asked softly, reaching across the desk to touch her arm. "Did you not know about this? We can claim fraud. We can contest the power of attorney. I can have Marcus brought in for deposition." Mary stared at the signature. The betrayal was so absolute, so fundamentally soul-crushing, that she physically felt something inside her snap. The loving, forgiving mother who had baked Thanksgiving pies died right there in the leather chair of that law office. She remembered Marcus complaining about the inefficient allocation of assets. She remembered Sarah saying, "I can't keep living paycheck to paycheck." They hadn't just been waiting for her to die. They had already started picking the meat off her bones while she was still breathing. When Mary finally looked up at Arthur Henderson, her eyes were completely dry. There was no panic left, only a terrifying, icy calm. "No, Arthur," Mary said, her voice steady and hard as diamonds. "Do not call Marcus. Do not alert the bank." "But Mary, they could begin foreclosure proceedings within the month." Mary reached into her purse. She pulled out the Ziploc bag containing the Mega Millions ticket and placed it deliberately on top of the forged loan document. "Arthur," she said, watching the lawyer's eyes widen in absolute shock as he recognized the paper, "I need you to set up an airtight, irrevocable blind trust. I need the best private investigator in the state of Ohio on retainer by tomorrow morning. And I need you to explain to me exactly how one goes about legally purchasing someone else's debt." The test had officially begun. The silence in the house was heavy, the kind of quiet that only settles into a home when it has been empty for too long. Mary sat at the worn oak dining table, a piece of furniture she and her late husband Thomas had purchased at a Sears scratch and dent sale in 1985. The surface was scarred with the memories of Sunday dinners, Thanksgiving turkeys, and the frantic late-night homework sessions of her 2 children. But tonight, The table held only 3 items, illuminated by the harsh yellow glare of the overhead pendant light. First, her worn, leather-bound Bible, its pages fragile and whispering of a lifetime of prayers. Tucked safely inside the Book of Psalms was the second item, a small rectangular piece of thermal paper. The Mega Millions ticket. $333 million. The numbers matched. The reality of it still hadn't fully settled into her bones. It was enough money to buy the world, enough to ensure that her bloodline would never know the sting of poverty for generations to come. Then there was the third item. It lay stark and unforgiving against the polished wood. A crisp white letterhead from a national bank. Notice of intent to foreclose. Mary traced the embossed logo of the bank with a trembling finger, her dark skin stark against the white paper. The document detailed a home equity line of credit, HELOC, taken out 3 years ago. $150,000, borrowed against the equity of the home she and Thomas had spent 30 years paying off. The signature at the bottom was hers, or rather an impeccable forgery of hers, authorized by a power of attorney she had vaguely remembered signing when she was hospitalized with a mild stroke, a document Marcus insisted was just in case of emergencies. They had stolen from her own flesh and blood. Marcus, with his tailored suits and corporate jargon, and Sarah, with her designer handbags and carefully curated social media life. They had leveraged the roof over their aging mother's head to fund their illusions of grandeur, and now the bill was due. Mary felt a tightness in her chest, a familiar, terrifying squeeze that reminded her of her fragile heart. She reached for her pill bottle, swallowing her medication with a sip of lukewarm water. The anger was there, simmering like coals in a dying fire, but it was overshadowed by a profound, suffocating grief. Lord, she prayed silently, closing her eyes, show me who they really are. Let me be wrong about my babies. She needed to know, before she unleashed the lawyers, before she revealed the millions that could erase this debt in a fraction of a second. She needed to know if there was any love left in them, or if the greed had consumed them whole. She reached for the landline receiver, its plastic cool against her ear. It was time for the test. She dialed Marcus first. The phone rang 3 times before his crisp professional voice cut through the line. Marcus Williams, Regional Director. Marcus, baby. It's Mama, Mary said. She didn't have to act much to make her voice sound thin and strained. The sorrow in her soul did the heavy lifting. Mama, it's Tuesday morning. I'm in the middle of Q3 projections. Is everything all right? His tone was clipped, the underlying irritation barely masked. I'm sorry to bother you at work, baby, Mary began, gripping the edge of the table. But I've got myself into a bit of a situation. It's my heart. The doctor changed my prescription to Eliquis and Medicare. They say I hit the donut hole. It's $800 out of pocket this month. There was a pause on the line. The sound of a keyboard clacking suddenly stopped. 800? Marcus sighed, a long, drawn-out sound of pure exhaustion. Mama, we've talked about this. You have to budget your Social Security better. I know, Marcus, I try, Mary said, her voice trembling. She glanced down at the foreclosure notice. But that's not the worst of it. I got a letter from the bank today. Something about a line of credit? They're talking about taking the house, baby. I don't understand it. I need help. The silence that followed was deafening. Mary could almost hear the gears turning in her son's head. He knew exactly what that letter was. He was the one who had drained the account to cover his catastrophic cryptocurrency investments. Mama, listen to me, Marcus finally said, his voice dropping into a low, soothing register, the voice he used to manage angry clients. You're getting confused. The bank makes mistakes all the time. I'll look into the paperwork when I have time. But as for the money, I just can't right now. You can't? Mary whispered. I can't, he repeated, sounding firmer. The market is a mess right now, and Monica insisted on sending little Trey to that elite lacrosse camp in Maryland. Do you know what that costs? We're stretched thin, Mama. I just need enough for my medication, Marcus, just to keep my heart beating right until the first of the month. This is exactly what I was telling Sarah the other day, Marcus said, ignoring her plea, pivoting smoothly to the offensive. You are living beyond your means. That house is too big for one person. The property taxes, the upkeep. It's a money pit. It's the home your father built for us, Mary said, a spark of genuine anger finally cutting through her grief. Dad's gone, Mama. We have to live in reality, Marcus countered coldly. Honestly, this might be a blessing in disguise. Have you looked into Shady Pines? It's a state-run assisted living facility. If you sell the house or let the bank take it, Medicaid will cover your room and board. They dispense the medication right there. You wouldn't have to worry about a thing. Mary closed her eyes. Shady Pines. It was notorious in their community. A bleak, underfunded warehouse for the forgotten elderly, smelling of bleach and despair. Her own son was suggesting she go there so he wouldn't have to spare a few $100s, or admit his financial crimes. I see, Mary said quietly. You want me in a home. I want you safe, Marcus corrected, his tone dripping with fake concern. It's tough love, Mama. I can't keep enabling this financial instability. I'm a father. My first priority has to be my own children. Let the house go. I've got to run to this meeting. We'll talk this weekend. The line clicked dead. He didn't even say goodbye. Mary slowly lowered the receiver. She didn't cry. The tears seemed to have dried up somewhere deep inside her. He had invoked his own child, her grandson Trey, to justify his cruelty. He had used the sacred duty of parenthood as a shield for his greed. She took a deep breath, smoothing her dress, gathering her shattered nerves. One down, one to go. She pressed the dial pad, calling her daughter. Sarah answered on the first ring. In the background, Mary could hear the hum of blow dryers and the rhythmic chatter of a high-end hair salon. Hey, Mama, make it quick. I'm under the dryer, Sarah said breezily. Sarah, baby, Mary said, keeping her voice low. I need your help. I'm in trouble. Trouble? What kind of trouble? The breezy tone vanished, replaced instantly by defensive suspicion. Mary repeated the story. The heart medication. The terrifying letter from the bank. The threat of losing the house. She waited for her daughter, the woman whose scraped knees she had kissed, whose broken heart she had mended after a bitter divorce, to offer a lifeline. Mama, are you serious right now? Sarah's voice was incredulous, echoing slightly in the salon. You're calling me for money? I don't have anyone else to turn to, Sarah. Lord have mercy, Sarah groaned, a sound of profound victimhood. Mama, you know I'm a single mother. Do you know how hard it is out here for a black woman trying to raise a boy alone? My alimony barely covers my lifestyle as it is. Your lifestyle, Mary thought, thinking of the $400 monthly salon visits and the designer shoes Sarah paraded on Instagram. I wouldn't ask if it wasn't life or death, baby. The medication. Mama, stop trying to guilt-trip me, Sarah snapped, her voice rising. The people in the salon were definitely listening now. My therapist and I just talked about this. Generational trauma, Mama. You have this financial trauma, this anxiety, and you're trying to project it onto me. I am trying to build wealth for Jamal. I cannot be pouring water into a leaky bucket. A leaky bucket. That's what she was to her daughter. The bank is threatening to foreclose, Sarah. Don't you care about the house? Your childhood home? Honestly? No, Sarah said bluntly. You should have done a reverse mortgage years ago, like I told you. Sarah knew perfectly well a reverse mortgage was impossible because she and Marcus had already drained the equity, but the lie came effortlessly to her lips. I cannot sacrifice my peace and my son's future to bail you out of your poor planning. I have to put Jamal first. I'm a mother too, Mama. I have to protect my own. Protect your own, Mary echoed softly. The irony was so thick it was suffocating. Look, set up a GoFundMe. Talk to the folks at the church. I can't take this on right now. My anxiety is peaking. I love you, but I have to establish boundaries. I'll call you next week. Click. Mary sat in the heavy silence of the kitchen. The sun was beginning to set, casting long, dark shadows across the worn floorboards. The test was over. The results were in. They had both failed, spectacularly and cruelly. They hadn't just refused to help. They had weaponized modern therapy speak and their own children to justify leaving their mother to drown. They thought they had won. They thought they had successfully pushed her to the edge of the cliff, ready to inherit whatever scraps were left when she finally fell over. A cold, hardened resolve began to settle over Mary's heart, replacing the grief. They wanted to play a game of survival? Fine, but they didn't know the rules had just changed, and she held all the chips. The kitchen grew dark. Mary didn't turn on the light. She just sat there, staring at the Mega Millions ticket, formulating a plan that would bring her children to their knees. Suddenly, the screen of her cell phone, sitting on the counter, lit up, buzzing violently against the granite. Mary blinked, pulled from her dark thoughts. She reached for the phone. The caller ID flashed a picture of a smiling young man in a graduation cap and gown. Jamal, her grandson, Sarah's boy. Mary hesitated. Had Sarah already called him? Was he calling to deliver the final blow? To tell his grandmother she was a burden to him, too? She braced herself for the impact and swiped to answer. "Hello?" Her voice was a raspy whisper. "Nana? You awake?" Jamal's voice came through, panting slightly. In the background, she could hear the heavy rumble of a forklift and the harsh beeping of a loading dock. He was at his night shift at the logistics warehouse. "I'm awake, baby. Why are you calling so late? Shouldn't you be focused on work?" "Man, forget work for a minute," Jamal said, his voice thick with worry. "Nana, I just got off the phone with my mom. She called complaining about how you ruined her salon day, talking about being sick and losing the house." Mary squeezed her eyes shut. So Sarah was already gossiping, twisting the knife. "Jamal, you don't need to get involved in grown folks' business." "Nana, stop!" Jamal interrupted, his tone gentle but firm. A tone so reminiscent of his grandfather Thomas that it made Mary's breath catch. "Mom was talking crazy, saying you need to go to Shady Pines. I told her she was out of her mind. Are you okay? Is your heart acting up again?" "My heart is... it's tired, Jamal." "Listen to me," Jamal said, the background noise shifting as he stepped into a quieter area. "I know Mom and Uncle Marcus ain't stepping up, they never do. But you got me, you hear? I don't have much. I got about $500 in my Chime account. I was saving it for next semester's books, but I can find the PDFs online. The money is yours." Mary's hand flew to her mouth to stifle a sob. "Oh, Jamal. No, baby, I can't take your school money." "Yes, you can and you will," the 20-year-old insisted, his voice cracking slightly with emotion. "You're the one who bought my first suit for prom when Mom said it was a waste of money. You're the one who slipped me $20 for gas every Sunday. You took care of us. Now it's my turn." "Jamal?" "I get off at 4 a.m., he continued, not letting her argue. "I'm coming straight to your house. I'm going to take you to the pharmacy myself and we'll pay for that Eloquise. And then we're going to sit down and look at those bank papers together. They ain't taking your house, Nana. Not while I'm breathing. I'll pick up extra shifts. I'll drop out for a semester and work full-time if I have to." Tears finally breached Mary's defenses, spilling hot and fast down her cheeks. They weren't tears of sorrow, but of overwhelming, profound relief. Amidst the rot and the greed, a single perfect rose had managed to bloom. "You would do that for me?" she whispered. "Even though your mother said I'm a leaky bucket?" Jamal scoffed, a bitter sound. "Mom only cares about buckets she can drink from. I care about the woman who raised me. I'll be there at 4:30, Nana. Keep the doors locked. Get some rest. I love you." "I love you too, my sweet boy," Mary said. The line disconnected. Mary sat in the dark for a long time, the phone clutched to her chest. The test was truly complete. The darkness in her children was terrifying, but the light in her grandson was blinding. She turned on the table lamp, bathing the room in a warm glow. She looked at the foreclosure notice, then at the lottery ticket. Sarah and Marcus had built their entire lives on a foundation of entitlement and deceit. They had used the concept of protecting their children as an excuse to abandon their mother. Well, Mary thought, wiping her tears and standing up, her spine straightening with newfound purpose. They were about to learn a very painful lesson about what it truly means to provide for the next generation. She walked over to her kitchen drawer and pulled out a notepad. Tomorrow, she wouldn't be crying. Tomorrow, she was going to war. She needed to call a private investigator. She needed to hire the most ruthless trust attorney in the state of Ohio. And most importantly, she needed to go car shopping. Her grandson's rusty sedan wasn't going to cut it anymore. The new heir to the Williams empire needed a proper ride. The conference room at Henderson and Vance was a testament to quiet, old-world power. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the gray, churning expanse of Lake Erie. But Mary Williams wasn't looking at the view. Her eyes were fixed on the thick manila folders resting on the polished mahogany table. It had been exactly 10 days since the phone calls that shattered her world. 10 days since her children had told her to sell her soul to Shady Pines to spare them a few $100s. Sitting across from her was Arthur Henderson, looking deeply troubled, and a man named Elias Thorne. Elias was a former forensic accountant turned private investigator. A man whose unassuming, rumpled suits belied a terrifying ability to unearth buried financial corpses. "I'm not going to sugarcoat this, Mrs. Williams," Elias said, his voice a low, gravelly baritone. He slid the first folder toward her. It had Marcus Williams typed on the tab. "Your son has been living a masterful lie." Mary opened the folder. It was filled with bank statements, wire transfers, and screenshots of trading platforms. "The $150,000 he extracted from your home's equity?" Elias tapped a specific spreadsheet. "It didn't go to Little Trey's lacrosse camp. It didn't go into a college fund. In late 2024, Marcus panicked over a stagnant quarter at his firm. He dumped $120,000 of your equity into a highly leveraged cryptocurrency scheme, hoping to double it and quietly pay the house back before you ever knew." Mary stared at the red numbers cascading down the page. "And he lost it. Every dime," Elias confirmed grimly. "When the crypto market took a dive, his position was liquidated overnight. He's currently underwater on his leased BMW, his country club dues are 3 months in arrears, and he's been shuffling credit card balances to keep up appearances. He is, for all intents and purposes, entirely broke." Mary felt a bitter taste in the back of her throat. Marcus, the son who had lectured her on inefficient asset allocation, the man who wore $1,000 suits and spoke to her like she was a financially illiterate child, was nothing more than a degenerate gambler in a silk tie. "And Sarah?" Mary asked, her voice dangerously calm. Elias slid the second folder over. "Sarah's situation is less sophisticated, but equally destructive. She discovered the HELOC Marcus took out. Instead of telling you, she used that knowledge to blackmail her brother. To keep her quiet, Marcus funneled the remaining $30,000 of your home's equity to her over the last 2 years. Mary's hands trembled slightly as she flipped through photographs of Sarah. Sarah sipping margaritas in Tulum. Sarah unboxing a Chanel bag on Instagram Live. Sarah getting a chemical peel at a luxury med spa. Her salon business has been operating at a loss for 18 months, Elias explained. She finances her influencer lifestyle entirely on high-interest credit cards and the hush money Marcus bled from your house. But the money ran out 3 months ago. That's why the bank payments stopped. That's why they are about to foreclose. They had carved her up like a Thanksgiving turkey. I see, Mary whispered, closing the folder. The silence in the room was heavy. Arthur looked at her with profound sympathy, waiting for the tears. But Mary didn't cry. There's one more thing, Mary, Arthur said softly, his voice tight with barely suppressed anger. And I need you to brace yourself for this. Elias found a filing in the Cuyahoga County Probate Court. It was submitted 3 days ago. Arthur handed her a single, crisp document. Across the top, in bold, terrifying letters, it read, Petition for appointment of guardian and conservator. Mary read the names of the petitioners, Marcus Williams and Sarah Williams. What does this mean, Arthur? She asked, though a cold dread was already wrapping around her heart. It means they are trying to have you declared legally incompetent, Arthur said, the disgust evident on his face. They cited your transient ischemic attack from 3 years ago. They are claiming you are suffering from vascular dementia, that you are exhibiting severe cognitive decline, and that you are a danger to yourself and your finances. They've asked the judge to grant them emergency, full control over your person and your estate. The room went completely still. Even Elias, a man who traded in human misery for a living, looked away to give her a moment of privacy. They didn't just want her house. They wanted her mind. They wanted to strip her of her civil rights, her autonomy, her very personhood. If they succeeded, Mary would become a legal ghost. They could sell Elmwood Avenue, throw her into the darkest corner of Shady Pines, and she wouldn't have the legal standing to even hire a lawyer to fight back. They were going to bury her alive to cover up their theft. Mary looked down at her hands, the hands that had checked Marcus for fevers in the middle of the night, the hands that had braided Sarah's hair. When she finally looked up, her dark eyes were devoid of any maternal warmth. They were the eyes of an ER nurse who had just triaged a fatal wound and decided exactly what needed to be amputated to save the host. Arthur, Mary said, her voice echoing with absolute terrifying authority. I want to see the best doctors in this state. I don't care what it costs. I want a fortress built around my mind. For the next 4 days, Mary Williams disappeared into a grueling gauntlet of medical and psychiatric evaluations. She didn't go to her regular physician. Arthur booked appointments with the head of neurology at the Cleveland Clinic, a forensic psychiatrist who routinely testified in high-stakes federal trials, and a leading geriatric cognitive specialist. She sat through hours of MRIs, the loud rhythmic clanking of the machine echoing her own pulsing resolve. She answered hundreds of questions, solved complex spatial puzzles, recalled word sequences, and underwent rigorous psychological profiling. The results were unanimous and staggering. Mrs. Williams, Dr. Eris Thorne, the renowned neurologist, said as he reviewed her scans on a backlit board, "Your brain shows zero signs of vascular dementia or abnormal cognitive decline. The TIA you suffered 3 years ago left no lasting damage. Frankly, your executive function and cognitive recall are sharper than most of my medical residents." Mary had them record the consultations on high-definition video. She had the doctors sign sworn, notarized affidavits attesting to her absolute mental clarity, completely destroying any future claim her children might attempt in probate court. The conservatorship petition was dead on arrival. With her mind legally shielded, Mary returned to Arthur's office to fortify the money. The Mega Millions ticket had been quietly claimed through a blind LLC, shielding her name from the ravenous local press. The after-tax lump sum of $212 million was now resting in a series of highly secure, diversified accounts. "We are establishing the Williams Family Trust," Mary instructed Arthur as they sat in his office, the paperwork spread out like battle plans. "I am the primary grantor and the initial trustee, but we need to establish the succession." "Given the circumstances," Arthur began carefully, "are you entirely sure you want to completely disinherit Marcus and Sarah? Juries can sometimes be sympathetic to biological children if they contest a will later." "Let them contest," Mary said coldly. "With the video depositions of my psychiatric evaluations and Elias's files on their financial fraud and elder abuse, any judge will throw them out of court before lunch. They get nothing, Arthur. Not a dime, not a photograph, not a silver spoon." Arthur nodded, his pen hovering over the document. "And the sole beneficiary?" "Jamal," Mary said, the first trace of warmth entering her voice in 2 weeks. "My grandson." She thought of Jamal working the 10 p.m. to 4:00 a.m. shift at the logistics warehouse, moving pallets of dog food and electronics just to keep the lights on, only to drag himself to an 8 a.m. macroeconomics class. She thought of him offering his last $500, his textbook money, to save the grandmother his own mother had discarded. "Jamal will be the sole heir to the estate upon my passing," Mary continued, her vision crystal clear. "But more importantly, I want him named as the successor trustee. If I become incapacitated, or when I die, Jamal doesn't just get the money. He gets the power. He controls the trust." Arthur raised an eyebrow, a slow, appreciative smile spreading across his face as he realized the magnitude of what she was doing. "You're making a 20-year-old college student the absolute financial authority over his mother and his uncle." "Yes," Mary said simply. "If Sarah or Marcus ever want to see a single cent from this family again, they will have to get down on their knees and beg the boy they've been neglecting. They used parenthood as an excuse to abandon me. Now they can answer to the child." The legal traps were set. The medical shields were raised. It was time to light the fuse. It was a Tuesday afternoon when Mary called an Uber to take her to the largest Ford dealership in Cuyahoga County. She walked into the gleaming showroom, ignoring the sleek Mustangs and luxury SUVs, and headed straight for the commercial truck division. She found what she was looking for, a brand new, fully loaded Ford F-15, Lariat. It was midnight black, with a heavy-duty bedliner, towing capacity that could pull a small house, and an interior of pristine, dark leather. It wasn't a flashy sports car. It was a blue-collar chariot. It was a vehicle for a working man. She paid the $85,000 sticker price in cash via a cashier's check from the trust. At 4:30 p.m., Mary pulled the massive truck into the driveway of Jamal's small, run-down apartment complex near the university. She honked the horn, 2 sharp, loud blasts that echoed off the brick buildings. A few moments later, Jamal walked out of his ground-floor unit. He looked exhausted, wearing gray sweatpants and a faded hoodie, rubbing sleep from his eyes before his next warehouse shift. He stopped dead in his tracks when he saw his grandmother sitting behind the wheel of the behemoth truck. Mary rolled down the window, a genuine smile breaking across her face for the first time in what felt like a lifetime. "Nana?" Jamal walked forward, utterly bewildered. "What? Whose truck is this? Did you rent this? Are we moving something?" Mary turned off the ignition, pulled the keys from the console, and stepped out. She walked around the hood and pressed the heavy set of keys into Jamal's calloused hand. "It's yours, baby," she said quietly. Jamal stared at the keys, then at the truck, then back at his grandmother. The color drained from his face. "Nana, no. Stop playing. This is an $80,000 truck. Did you take out another loan? The bank is already trying to take the house." "The house is fine, Jamal. The bank has been handled," Mary said, placing a gentle hand on his cheek. "I bought this free and clear. It's registered in your name." "But how?" Jamal's voice broke, panic edging into his tone. "Nana, where did you get this kind of money? Did you sell Dad's old life insurance policy? You need that for your heart medication." "Jamal, look at me," Mary commanded gently. "Do I look confused? Do I look like I'm making a mistake?" Jamal searched her eyes. He didn't see the frail, frightened woman who had called him crying 10 days ago. He saw a matriarch standing tall, radiating an undeniable, quiet power. "You offered me everything you had when you thought I was drowning," Mary said, her voice thick with emotion. "You were willing to drop out of school to work for my medication. You showed me your heart, Jamal. Now I'm showing you mine. Take the keys." Tears welled up in the young man's eyes. He didn't ask any more questions. He just stepped forward and wrapped his arms around his grandmother, burying his face in her shoulder, crying tears of sheer, overwhelming exhaustion and gratitude. "Thank you, Nana," he whispered into her coat. "I'll pay you back. I swear. When I graduate, I'll pay you back every cent." "You already have, my sweet boy," Mary murmured, holding him tight. "You already have." As Jamal climbed into the driver's seat, running his hands over the steering wheel with the reverence of a man touching a holy relic, Mary pulled out her cell phone. She snapped a picture of Jamal smiling brightly through the driver's side window of the brand-new F-150. She opened her text messages, attached the photo, and sent it to a group chat containing only 2 other people, Marcus and Sarah. She didn't add a caption. She didn't need to. She slipped the phone back into her purse, listening to the powerful rumble of the V8 engine as Jamal started the truck. The preparation in the shadows was complete. The trap was fully primed. Now all Mary had to do was sit back and wait for the explosion. The photograph of Jamal sitting in the driver's seat of the $80,000 Ford F-150 was delivered to Marcus and Sarah's phones at exactly 5:14 p.m. For the next 45 minutes, Mary's house was steeped in a profound, immaculate silence. She moved through the rooms of the Elmwood Avenue house with the slow, deliberate grace of a priestess preparing an altar. She brewed a pot of chamomile tea, listening to the soft whistle of the kettle. Outside, the sky was bruising purple with the threat of an early summer thunderstorm, casting long, dramatic shadows across the hardwood floors. She walked into the dining room. She did not set out the good china or the polished silverware. Instead, she placed 3 thick manila folders evenly spaced on the scarred oak table. Beside them, she placed her reading glasses and her teacup. Then she sat at the head of the table, folded her hands in her lap, and waited. The silence shattered at 6:02 p.m. It began with the aggressive screech of tires on asphalt. Mary didn't flinch. She simply took a sip of her tea as car doors slammed with violent force. Footsteps pounded up the wooden steps of the wraparound porch. The front door, which Mary had intentionally left unlocked, flew open so hard the brass knob punched a dent into the drywall. "Mama," Marcus's voice boomed through the hallway. It wasn't the smooth, practiced tone of the regional director. It was raw, unadulterated panic masking itself as righteous fury. Right behind him was Sarah, her high heels clicking frantically against the floorboards. "Are you out of your mind? Where are you?" They stormed into the dining room, stopping short when they saw Mary sitting calmly at the head of the table. The contrast was jarring. Marcus was sweating through his bespoke dress shirt, his tie loosened, his eyes wild. Sarah looked manic, her designer sunglasses pushed up into her perfectly styled hair, her chest heaving. "What is the meaning of this?" Marcus demanded, stabbing a finger toward his phone screen, which displayed the picture of Jamal. "Did you buy that boy a truck? An $80,000 Lariat?" "Hello, Marcus." "Hello, Sarah," Mary said softly. "Please come in." Close the front door behind you." "I'm not closing anything until you start making sense," Sarah shrieked, her voice echoing shrilly in the quiet room. "Last week you were crying on the phone about not being able to afford your heart pills. You were begging us for money. And now you're buying luxury vehicles for a 20-year-old? Have you completely lost your grip on reality?" "Actually," Mary said, her voice dropping a fraction of an octave, carrying a weight that forced them both to momentarily freeze. "I haven't been this grounded in reality in 30 years. Now, close the door." Marcus, momentarily derailed by the sheer authority in his mother's voice, a tone he hadn't heard since he was a teenager caught stealing from her purse, turned and pushed the heavy front door shut. As soon as it clicked, Mary reached under the table and pressed the button for the newly installed electronic deadbolt. A loud, heavy thwack echoed through the house as the steel bolt slid into place, sealing them inside. Sarah jumped at the sound. "Did you just lock us in?" "Sit down," Mary commanded, gesturing to the 2 empty chairs on either side of the table. "We are not sitting down for a lecture," Marcus sneered, recovering his bravado. He paced the length of the room, running a hand over his thinning hair. "We are putting a stop to this. Right now, you are clearly having a manic episode. If you took out a predatory loan to buy that truck, or worse, if Jamal manipulated you into dipping into what little equity you have left—" "Equity?" Mary interrupted, the word rolling off her tongue like a poisoned candy. "That's an interesting choice of words, Marcus. Let's talk about equity." She reached out and flipped open the first manila folder. "Sit down," she said again. It wasn't a request. Reluctantly, driven by a gnawing sense of unease, Marcus pulled out a chair and sat. Sarah, crossing her arms defensively over her chest, took the chair opposite him. Mary slid a piece of paper across the polished oak toward her son. "Do you recognize this, Marcus?" Marcus looked down. It was a high-resolution photocopy of the home equity line of credit authorization. His own signature stared back at him from the bottom line, authorizing the withdrawal of $150,000 against the house they were currently sitting in. The color drained from Marcus's face so fast he looked as though he might faint. The blustering, arrogant corporate manager vanished, replaced instantly by a terrified, cornered animal. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. "What is that?" Sarah asked, leaning forward, her eyes darting between her brother and her mother. "That," Mary said, her voice as smooth and cold as glass, "is a federal crime. It's a record of the moment your brother, acting as my power of attorney while I was recovering from a stroke, stole $150,000 from the home your father and I bled to pay for." "Mama, wait, let me explain," Marcus stammered, his hands shaking as he touched the paper. "It was an investment. I was going to put it back. The market took a turn. I was trying to build generational wealth for us. You lost it on a cryptocurrency gamble because you were too proud to admit you were failing at your job." Mary cut him off with surgical precision. "You took the roof over my head and pushed it across a casino table." Sarah let out a loud, dramatic gasp, pressing a hand to her chest. "Oh my God, Marcus, how could you? Mama, I had no idea. I swear to you, I didn't know he did this." Mary didn't look at Marcus. She turned her dark, unblinking eyes onto her daughter. Slowly, she opened the second folder. "Don't insult my intelligence, Sarah," Mary said quietly. She pulled out a stack of bank wire receipts and slid them toward her daughter. "You found out about the loan 2 years ago, but instead of coming to me, instead of protecting your mother, you used it to blackmail your brother. $30,000, Sarah. That's what he transferred to you over the last 24 months to keep your mouth shut. $30,000 of my blood and sweat, so you could fly to Tulum and pretend to be rich on the internet." Sarah's mouth snapped shut. The manicured hands that had been resting on the table slowly retreated to her lap. She looked at the wire transfers, her breathing shallow and rapid. "You're both thieves," Mary stated, the word hanging in the heavy air. "But that isn't the worst part. I could survive the theft. I raised 2 children. I'm used to being financially depleted." Mary paused, taking a slow sip of her tea. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. Marcus was staring at the table. Sarah was staring at the wall. They had walked in as conquerors, ready to scold an errant child. In less than 5 minutes, they had been reduced to criminals awaiting sentencing. "The worst part," Mary continued, her voice trembling for the very first time, not with fear, but with a profound, earth-shattering heartbreak. was last week, when the bank sent the foreclosure notice because you stopped making the payments, Marcus. When I called you, begging for help with my heart medication. Marcus swallowed hard, refusing to look up. Mama, I didn't have the money. I was panicking. You told me to budget my Social Security, Mary quoted him perfectly. You told me to sell my home and move to Shady Pines. And you, Sarah? Mary turned to her daughter, whose eyes were welling with panic-induced tears. You told me I was a leaky bucket. You told me you couldn't sacrifice your son's future for my poor planning. I was setting boundaries, Sarah cried out, grasping desperately at her therapy rhetoric. I was overwhelmed, Mama. You don't understand the pressure I'm under. Oh, I understand perfectly, Mary said. She reached for the third and final folder. Her hands were perfectly steady now. I understand that when you realized you had bled me dry, when you realized the bank was going to take the house and your theft might be discovered, you panicked. And instead of confessing, instead of trying to save me, you decided to bury me alive. Mary opened the third folder. She pulled out the probate court filing and slapped it down in the exact center of the table. Petition for appointment of guardian and conservator. Marcus squeezed his eyes shut. A single tear escaped, rolling down his cheek. Sarah let out a whimpering sound and covered her face with her hands. Vascular dementia, Mary read the charge out loud, tasting the sheer bile of the words. Severe cognitive decline. You petitioned the state of Ohio to strip me of my civil rights. You wanted to declare me incompetent, lock me in a state-run facility, and seize total control of my estate before the bank could investigate the HELOC fraud. You were going to take away my mind to cover your tracks. We thought you were getting confused, Sarah sobbed loudly, a desperate, ugly sound. We thought we were doing what was best for you. You're getting older, Mama. You shouldn't be alone. Stop lying, Mary's voice cracked like a whip, echoing off the dining room walls. It was the loudest sound she had made in years. Both Marcus and Sarah flinched violently, shrinking back into their chairs. You don't care if I'm alone, Mary said, rising slowly from her chair. She stood at the head of the table, a towering figure of absolute maternal judgment. You care that I am still breathing. I heard you on Thanksgiving, Marcus. On the patio. We might just have to wait it out. You have spent the last 5 years waiting for my heart to give out so you could pick my bones clean. Marcus finally looked up. His face was a mask of utter devastation. Mama, please, I'm sorry. I was desperate. I lost everything. I didn't know what to do. I'll go to jail for the forgery. I know I will. But please, don't hate us. Hate you? Mary asked softly. She shook her head. I don't hate you, Marcus. I pity you. I pity both of you. You have hollowed yourselves out for money. You have sacrificed your morality, your family, your very souls. For what? For leased cars and country club memberships? Mary walked over to her purse, which was resting on the sideboard. She reached inside and pulled out the Ziploc bag. She walked back to the table and dropped it directly on top of the conservatorship petition. Inside the clear plastic was a photocopy of the Mega Millions ticket, alongside a certified bank statement from the Williams Family Trust. What is that? Marcus whispered, his eyes locking onto the string of zeros on the bank statement. That, Mary said, is the punchline to the sick joke you made of my life. Marcus leaned forward, his eyes tracking the numbers. $212,450,000. He looked at the date on the lottery ticket. It was dated a few days before they had filed the conservatorship papers. $333 million before taxes, Mary stated clearly. I won it 3 weeks ago. The silence that followed was not just heavy, it was a vacuum. It sucked the oxygen right out of the room. Sarah dropped her hands from her face, staring at the paper as if it were a glowing radioactive isotope. Marcus's jaw went slack. The realization of what they were looking at, and more importantly what they had just lost, crashed over them like a physical tidal wave. 200 million? Sarah choked out, the words scraping against her throat. You see, Mary said, leaning over the table, planting her hands firmly on the wood. If you had just answered the phone last week and been my children, if you had just said, Mama, we don't have the money, but we'll figure it out together. If you had shown me 1 single ounce of grace, I would have paid off your debts the next morning. I would have bought you a house, Marcus. I would have bought you a salon, Sarah. I would have given you the world. Marcus let out a sound that was half gasp, half sob. He buried his face in his arms on the table, his shoulders shaking violently as the magnitude of his catastrophic greed broke him in half. "But you couldn't do it," Mary continued, her voice relentless, hammering the final nails into their coffins. "Because you didn't want a mother. You wanted an ATM. You used your own children as excuses for your selfishness. I have to put my son first, you said. I'm building generational wealth. Well, let me teach you a lesson about generational wealth." Sarah reached out a trembling hand, trying to touch Mary's arm. Mama, we're your flesh and blood. We made a mistake, a terrible, horrible mistake. But we can fix this. We can go to therapy. We can be a family again. You have to forgive us. God commands us to forgive." Mary pulled her arm back as if Sarah's touch would burn her. "I have forgiven you, Sarah. I've forgiven you for the lies, for the theft, for the cruelty. But forgiveness does not mean restoration. My Bible also says, 'Whatsoever a man soweth, that shall he also reap.'" Mary stood up straight, adjusting her cardigan. The storm outside finally broke, a low rumble of thunder rattling the window panes. "I have spent the last week with the best neurologists in the state of Ohio," Mary said, outlining her victory with chilling precision. "They have certified my mental competence on video. Your conservatorship petition is dead. I have placed the entire $200 million into an irrevocable blind trust." Marcus looked up, his eyes bloodshot, his face wet with tears. "Mama, what are you going to do to us?" "To you?" Mary looked genuinely surprised. "I'm not going to do anything to you, Marcus. I'm not going to press charges for the forgery. I'm not going to call the police." A fleeting, desperate spark of hope ignited in Sarah's eyes. "You're not?" "No," Mary said, "because putting you in prison would be too easy. It would give you a chance to play the victim. No, I am simply going to let you live in the reality you created." Mary walked to the front door and unlocked the deadbolt. She pulled the heavy door open, letting the cool, rain-scented air sweep into the stifling hallway. "The bank will foreclose on this house in 30 days, Mary informed them. "I am not paying off the HELOC. I am letting it go. I have already purchased a new estate out in Chagrin Falls. You, Marcus, will have to explain to the bank, and likely your employer, where that $150,000 went. And you, Sarah, will have to figure out how to pay your rent without your brother's hush money." "Mama, please." Marcus scrambled up from the table, rushing toward the door, falling to his knees on the hardwood floor. "Please don't do this. My career will be over. I'll lose everything. I'll be ruined." "You ruined yourself, Marcus," Mary said, looking down at him without a shred of pity. "What about Jamal?" Sarah screamed, panic making her feral. "You bought him a truck. You're giving him our inheritance." "Jamal is the only one in this family who knows what the word family means," Mary said, her eyes flashing. "When I asked for help, Jamal offered me his last $500. He offered to quit school to take care of me. He didn't ask for a dime, but he gave me his heart. That is why Jamal is not just receiving a truck." Mary paused, ensuring her next words would carve themselves permanently into their memories. "I have made Jamal the sole heir to my estate, but more importantly, I have named him the successor trustee of the Williams Family Trust." The words hung in the air. It took a moment for the legal implications to penetrate their panicked minds. When it did, Marcus slumped against the wall, defeated, while Sarah let out a long, wailing cry. "That's right," Mary nodded. "If either of you ever find yourselves truly drowning, if you ever need a loan to keep a roof over your heads or money to put food on your tables, you won't come to me. You will have to go to Jamal. You will have to look your 20-year-old son and nephew in the eye, confess what you did to his grandmother, and beg him for charity." Mary stepped out onto the porch. The rain had started to fall, drumming a steady, cleansing rhythm against the wooden roof. "Get out of my house," Mary commanded, her voice ringing with the finality of a judge bringing down a gavel. "And do not ever call me again unless you are dying." She watched as her children, broken, humiliated, and utterly destroyed by the weight of their own actions, stumbled out of the house and into the pouring rain. They didn't speak to each other. They just got into their cars, the engines firing up in the gloom, and drove away, leaving behind the $333 million empire they had thrown away for pennies. Mary stood on the porch, taking a deep breath of the cool, wet air. The chest pain that had plagued her for years seemed to have miraculously vanished. The storm was here, but for the first time in a long time, Mary Williams was completely safe from the rain. 30 days can change the entire landscape of a life. For Mary Williams, 30 days was the exact amount of time it took to transition from a financially suffocated widow in a decaying house to the matriarch of a sprawling, ironclad dynasty. She had moved into her new estate in Chagrin Falls, an exclusive enclave surrounded by centuries-old oak trees and rolling green hills. The property was a masterpiece of stone and glass, but more importantly, it was a fortress of absolute peace. Jamal had moved into the fully equipped guest house on the property. He had quit his grueling night shifts at the warehouse. His tuition was paid in full for the next 4 years, and for the first time in his young life, his only job was to focus on his education and his future. Mary should have been entirely at rest, but she knew human nature too well, particularly the nature of her own children. Greed, once it takes root in the bone marrow, does not simply die because it is starved. It mutates. It becomes desperate. The confirmation of her suspicion arrived on a Tuesday morning via a man in a rumpled suit standing at her front gate. He was a process server. Sitting in the sun-drenched breakfast nook of her new home, Mary adjusted her reading glasses and broke the seal on the thick legal envelope. Jamal sat across from her, sipping coffee, his brow furrowed in concern as he watched his grandmother's eyes scan the documents. "What is it, Nana?" Jamal asked. Mary let out a soft, humorless chuckle and slid the papers across the marble island. "It appears your mother and your uncle have decided that if they cannot declare me insane, they will simply declare you a criminal." Jamal picked up the petition. Marcus Williams and Sarah Williams versus Jamal Williams. It was a civil lawsuit filed in the Cuyahoga County Court of Common Pleas. The charges were staggering: elder abuse, undue influence, and fraudulent manipulation. Marcus and Sarah, utterly ruined and facing imminent financial collapse, had found a sleazy, contingency fee lawyer willing to throw a Hail Mary pass. They were alleging that Jamal had systematically isolated his vulnerable elderly grandmother, brainwashed her against her children, and manipulated her into buying him an $80,000 truck and making him the sole beneficiary of her lottery winnings. They were petitioning the court for an emergency injunction to freeze the Williams family trust and demand a fair and equitable redistribution of the assets to her biological children. Jamal stared at the paper, the betrayal hitting him like a physical blow. "My own mother is suing me? She's accusing me of abusing you?" "They have nothing left to lose, baby," Mary said calmly, folding her hands. "When a rat is backed into a corner, it doesn't reason. It bites. Nana, what do we do? If they freeze the trust?" "They aren't going to freeze anything," Mary said, reaching for her phone to dial Arthur Henderson. "But it is time to put this rabid animal down for good. Get dressed in that new suit we bought you, Jamal. We have a meeting to attend." 3 days later, the air inside the sterile, glass-walled conference room of a downtown Cleveland arbitration center was thick with tension. It was neutral ground, chosen by the mediator to keep the warring factions from screaming at each other in a public courthouse. Mary sat on one side of the long mahogany table, her posture impeccably straight, wearing a tailored cream-colored suit. To her right sat Arthur Henderson, looking supremely unbothered. To her left sat Jamal, wearing a sharp, charcoal gray suit, looking every inch the young executive he was training to become. Across from them sat the opposition. The physical toll of the last month was startlingly apparent. Marcus looked as though he had aged 10 years. He was wearing a suit, but it hung loosely on his frame, hinting at rapid weight loss. His eyes were deeply bagged, darting nervously around the room. Sarah looked even worse. The facade of the wealthy influencer had entirely crumbled. Her designer roots were overgrown, her acrylic nails were chipped, and the relentless, nervous bouncing of her leg betrayed her spiraling anxiety. Sitting between them was their attorney, a man named Sterling. He had the slick, hungry look of a man who chased ambulances for a living and thought he had just stumbled into a gold mine. "Let's get right to it," Sterling began, leaning forward aggressively, steepling his fingers. "My clients have suffered immense emotional distress. Mr. Williams and Ms. Williams were abruptly cut off from their mother by a calculated campaign of alienation orchestrated by the young man sitting across from me. We have sworn affidavits from my clients detailing Jamal's manipulative behavior. We are prepared to drag this through open court, subpoena Mrs. Williams's medical records, and freeze every asset she possesses." Sterling paused, flashing a predatory smile. "However, my clients love their mother. They want to avoid a public spectacle. If Mrs. Williams agrees to dissolve the current trust, establish a new one with a 50-50 split between Marcus and Sarah, and pay legal fees. We will drop the elder abuse charges against the boy." Arthur Henderson didn't speak. He didn't even look at Sterling. He simply turned his head and looked at Mary, deferring completely to her authority. Mary let the silence stretch. She looked at Marcus, who couldn't meet her eyes. She looked at Sarah, who was glaring at Jamal with toxic resentment. "Mr. Sterling," Mary finally spoke, her voice smooth and chillingly calm. "I suggest you ask your clients why they did not pursue their original petition for a conservatorship." Sterling frowned, glancing quickly at Marcus. "My clients realized that taking away your autonomy was a step too far. They chose a more measured legal route out of respect." "They dropped it," Mary corrected, reaching into her leather briefcase. "Because of this." She pulled out a sleek tablet and slid it across the table to Sterling. She tapped the screen. A high-definition video began to play. It was Dr. Eris Thorne, the chief of neurology at the Cleveland Clinic, looking directly into the camera. "I have comprehensively examined Mary Williams," the doctor's voice echoed in the quiet room. "Her cognitive function is in the top 1 percentile for her age group. She possesses total unimpaired executive function. Any claim of dementia, undue influence, or mental vulnerability is not only medically baseless, it borders on the absurd." Sterling's confident smile faltered. He hit pause, his eyes widening as he read the digital signature and the notary stamp embedded in the video file. "I have 5 more videos just like that from the leading psychiatrists in this state," Mary said, watching the lawyer realize his case was built on sand. "I also have a mountain of evidence, compiled by a licensed private investigator, documenting Marcus's forgery of a HELOC loan and Sarah's subsequent extortion of her brother. If you file this frivolous lawsuit in open court, Mr. Sterling, I will not only countersue you for malicious prosecution and seek to have you disbarred, but I will hand the fraud files directly to the district attorney." Sterling swallowed hard. The gold mine had just turned into a minefield. He looked at Marcus, his face pale with fury. "You didn't tell me about a forged loan." It's complicated," Marcus stammered, sweating profusely. "It's not complicated," Mary said, her gaze turning lethal as she locked eyes with her son. "It's criminal, but even that isn't why we are here today. I didn't come here to argue with a cheap lawyer. I came here to deliver the final accounting." Mary stood up slowly. She walked over to the window, looking out at the Cleveland skyline. "You see, for the last 30 days, I haven't just been decorating my new house. I have been putting my capital to work," Mary said, her reflection in the glass overlaying the city below. She turned back to face them. "Sarah, let's start with you." Sarah stiffened, her hands gripping the edge of the table. "You have been complaining on Facebook all week," Mary noted dryly, "about the heartless new corporate landlord that recently bought the Oasis luxury lofts where you rent your apartment." Sarah blinked, confused by the sudden pivot. "How do you know about that?" "Yes, they bought the building 2 weeks ago and immediately served me a 30-day notice to quit for non-payment of rent. They won't even accept a partial payment plan. They're trying to throw me out on the street." "They aren't trying, Sarah. They are going to," Mary said. She walked back to the table and dropped a single sheet of corporate registry paperwork in front of her daughter. "Because the Shell LLC that purchased the Oasis luxury lofts is a subsidiary of the Williams Family Trust. I am your corporate landlord, Sarah." Sarah let out a choked gasp, recoiling from the paper as if it had caught fire. "You haven't paid rent in 3 months," Mary continued mercilessly. "You used to pay it with the hush money you extorted from your brother's theft of my house. Now that the well is dry, you expect to live for free. Your eviction is scheduled for Friday. The sheriff will be there at 8 a.m. to change the locks. You are officially homeless." "Mama, no!" Sarah screamed, bursting into hysterical tears, burying her face in her hands. "You can't. Where will I go? What will I do?" "You will figure it out," Mary replied, throwing Sarah's own words right back at her. "Just like you told me to figure out my heart medication." Mary then turned her devastating focus onto her son. Marcus was trembling now, his hands gripping his knees so tightly his knuckles were white. "Marcus," Mary said softly, "you lost your job on Monday, didn't you?" Marcus nodded numbly, too terrified to speak. "You told Sarah it was corporate downsizing," Mary says, he said. "You told her Crestview Capital was restructuring. That was a lie. You were fired for cause." Marcus looked up, sheer panic in his eyes. How could you possibly know that?" Because, Mary said, leaning over the table, bringing her face close to his, 3 weeks ago, my trust attorneys approached the senior partners at Crestview Capital. We offered to inject $50 million of liquidity into their boutique firm, making me the undisputed majority shareholder. But I had one condition before the ink dried. Marcus stopped breathing. I demanded a complete third-party forensic audit of the regional director's accounts, Mary whispered. They found it, Marcus. They found the client accounts you've been skimming from to cover your crypto losses. They found the unauthorized transfers. You didn't just steal from me. You stole from your firm. Marcus let out a guttural sob and collapsed forward onto the table, his head resting on the mahogany wood, weeping with the total, shattered abandon of a man who knew his life was entirely over. As the majority shareholder, I personally directed the board to terminate you immediately, Mary stated, her voice echoing with the finality of a judge's gavel. And I instructed the compliance officers to forward the audit results to the SEC and the local authorities. You won't just be looking for a new job, Marcus. You will be looking for a criminal defense attorney. Sterling, the sleazy lawyer, had heard enough. He quietly stood up, packed his briefcase with trembling hands, and practically ran out of the conference room without saying a single word to his clients. The silence that fell over the room was apocalyptic. Only the sound of Marcus's wretched sobbing and Sarah's hyperventilating filled the space. They had walked into the room hoping to bully their mother out of a few $1 million. They had just been informed that she held the absolute power of life and death over their entire existence. "Mama, please," Marcus gasped out, lifting his tear-streaked face from the table. "We are begging you. Have mercy. I'll go to prison. I won't survive it. Sarah will be on the street. We'll do anything. We'll sign whatever you want, just please. Help us." Mary looked at them, the broken, pathetic remains of the children she had once loved more than her own life. She felt no joy in their destruction, only a profound, hollow sadness for what could have been. "You want help?" Mary asked quietly. Both of them nodded frantically, their eyes wide with desperate hope. Mary stepped back from the table. She gestured to the young man sitting silently to her left. "I told you on the day I kicked you out of my house," Mary said, her voice devoid of any emotion. "I am no longer in the business of dispensing family charity. If you want mercy, if you want a loan to hire a defense attorney, or a cheap apartment to rent, you do not ask me." Mary looked at her grandson. "You ask the trustee." Marcus and Sarah slowly turned their heads to look at Jamal. Jamal had sat through the entire proceeding without moving a muscle. He had watched his mother and his uncle try to frame him for a felony. He had watched them break under the weight of their own sins. Now the absolute power of the Williams empire rested entirely on his 20-year-old shoulders. Sarah reached out a shaking hand toward her son. "Jamal, baby, please. I'm your mother. You have to help me." Jamal looked at this woman who had birthed him. He remembered the time she had screamed at him for asking for textbook money. He remembered the coldness in her voice when she told him his grandmother was a burden. He remembered the terror he felt when he saw the lawsuit accusing him of elder abuse. Slowly, Jamal reached into the inner pocket of his tailored suit jacket. He pulled out a sleek, minimalist business card. He slid it across the table toward his mother and his uncle. It read, "Jamal Williams, Trustee and Chief Executive Officer, the Williams Family Trust." "This is the contact number for the Trust's legal department," Jamal said. His voice was not angry. It wasn't vindictive. It was something far more devastating. It was strictly professional. "If you wish to apply for a microloan, you may submit an application through the proper channels. It will be reviewed based on your credit history and collateral. Given your current situations, I highly doubt you will be approved." "Jamal!" Sarah shrieked, slamming her hands on the table. "I am your mother." "A mother protects her family," Jamal said, his eyes turning cold and hard as steel. "You tried to destroy yours. From now on, you are just an applicant, and your application is denied." Jamal stood up, buttoning his suit jacket. He looked at his grandmother and offered her his arm. "Are we finished here, Mrs. Williams?" Mary smiled, a genuine, warm smile that reached her eyes. She took her grandson's arm. "Yes, Mr. Trustee. I believe our business here is concluded." Without looking back, Mary and Jamal walked out of the conference room, leaving Marcus and Sarah trapped in the total, suffocating darkness of their own making. 6 months later, the autumn leaves in Chagrin Falls had turned to vibrant shades of gold and crimson painting the estate in a warm, fiery glow. Mary Williams sat on the expansive stone patio overlooking the rolling hills, a soft cashmere blanket draped over her lap. The crisp evening air was refreshing. She held a cup of Earl Grey tea, watching the sun slowly dip below the horizon. Jamal walked out onto the patio, carrying a thick binder of financial reports. He had grown into his role remarkably well. He was tough, fair, and fiercely protective of the empire they were building together. He pulled up a wrought iron chair and sat beside her. "The quarterly reports are in, Nana," Jamal said, flipping the binder open. "The investments are outperforming the market by 4%, and the charitable foundation just approved the grant for the new pediatric wing at the Cleveland Clinic." "Excellent work, baby," Mary murmured, not looking at the papers, but at the brilliant colors of the sunset. "I also got an email from the legal department," Jamal added, his tone shifting slightly. "Uncle Marcus took a plea deal, 5 years in minimum security for the corporate fraud. And Mom, she's working the night shift at a diner downtown. She's renting a room in a boarding house." Mary took a slow sip of her tea. She felt a brief phantom ache in her chest, the last lingering ghost of a mother's sorrow. But it faded quickly, replaced by the profound peace of a woman who had finally balanced the scales. "They made their choices, Jamal," Mary said softly. "The truth has a way of forcing people to pay their debts, one way or another." Jamal closed the binder and looked out at the horizon with her. "You know, Nana, if they had just been kind to you that day on the phone, everything would be different." "Yes," Mary agreed, a small knowing smile playing on her lips. "But then we would have never known the truth. And the truth, my sweet boy, is the most valuable thing in this world." Mary reached out and patted Jamal's hand, enjoying the quiet beauty of the evening. They had lost their family, but they had found each other. And as the last light of the sun faded into a starlit night, Mary Williams knew that she was the richest woman in the world, in every way that truly mattered.